Good afternoon to all of you. We shall start with an invocation to God to bless this meeting, to bless each of us. Sister Nirmala and Sister Genestis from the MSI team will lead us in a song of prayer.
Let there be love shared among us. Let there be love in our eyes. May now your love sweep our nations. Cause us, O Lord, to your eyes. Give us a fresh understanding of sisterly love that is real. Let there be love shared among us. Let there be love. Let there be justice shared among us. Let there be justice in our eyes. May now your justice sweep our nations. Cause us, O Lord, to your eyes. Give us a fresh understanding of brotherly justice that is real. Let there be justice shared among us. Let there be justice. Let there be peace shared among us. Let there be peace in our lives. May now your peace sweep our nations. Cause us, O Lord, to your eyes. Give us a fresh understanding of sisterly peace that is real. Let there be peace shared among us. Let there be peace. Let there be justice. Let there be love.
Thank you. Thank you, Sister Genestis. Thank you, Sister Nirmala. Brothers and sisters, collaborators, yesterday we had the context setting of this conference, this global conference that we started yesterday. Today, in fact, yesterday, we basically did a reading of the signs of our times to see how COVID-19 has affected our people in different parts of the world. We had speaker from the African continent, we had another from the US, we had speakers from India. We listened to speakers talking about the situation of human rights in countries of Asia and Africa. We saw how democratic spaces are shrinking rapidly in our countries, and the right to dissent is often considered anti-national. The freedom of religion and belief, the right to work, and the rights of women and children have come to be at risk. Economic and social rights, such as food, housing, education, and healthcare, have become more and more difficult for a large section of our people. We talked about the need to reassert our rights yesterday and become politically conscious, politically active, if we are to sustain humanity's civilizational progress that we have made over the centuries. We saw how institutionalized discrimination is a reality. Institutionalized discrimination based on race, based on caste, based on religion is a reality in our body politic and governance processes. But I thought These institutional discrimination is often in our mindsets, in our attitudes, the values that we hold, the language we speak, and often within our institutional structures. Yesterday, we looked at the world at large. Today, we are looking at possible responses as individuals and citizens of our countries, as religious brothers, blessed with the Montfortian charisma. Possible responses as institutions and works. And it is my hope that we shall be able to come to certain conclusions as we listen to speakers today, as we converse among ourselves, and as we draw a plan of action and strategies through tomorrow. Now, I request Brother Irudayam to welcome the participants officially on behalf of the organizers, the Gabriel Secretariat for Justice, Peace and Integrity of Creation Office of the National Council of the Montfort Brothers of St. Gabriel in India, and the GSJP Asia Pacific Office, who are the organizers of this conference. I request Brother Irudayam to welcome the participants. He is the provincial of the Trichy province of the Brothers of St. Gabriel and the chairman of the Gabrielite Secretariat for Justice and Peace and Integrity of Creation of the National Council of India. Brother Irudayam.
Our beloved and most reverend Superior General John Clerical, our General Assistants Reverend Brother Dionigi, T.K. James, Brother Brady, Jean Paul, Brother Michael, Brother Theo, speakers of the day, brothers connected in Zoom from all the corners of the world, collaborators, associates, friends, well-wishers and teachers, warm greetings and welcome to each one of you. My special welcome to today's resource persons, Reverend Father Lazar, SVD, the Mission Secretary of the congregation, Rome. Also the nephew of our late Brother Pakinath, Reverend Father Matthew, OFM, theologian and writer, Kuchirani Abraham, MG, University of Kottayam, Reverend Brother Paul Raj, Principal, Videhi, Bangalore, and our former Assistant General, Reverend Brother Dominic Yeo, District Superior of Southeast Asia and Director, Montfort Center, Singapore, and all the participants of today's program. Yesterday, we had participated and came to know the issues due to COVID-19. And today, we will hear from the speakers the responses that the Church has taken and exhortation by Pope Francis, the responses we, brothers and sisters, and the Christians should take to counter the problems faced by the humanity. COVID-19 crisis has affected societies and economics around the world, and will need to be permanently reshape our world as it continues to unfold. It has deepened the crisis of delivering free health care for all and everywhere. All of us need all of us.
Hello.
It has worsened the existing inequalities that are visible today. Psychological effects. All of us need all of us. It has worsened the existing inequalities and are visible today. The socio-psychological effects rising from the outbreak have been on rise. From mental depression and domestic conflicts, the racist attacks and international and regionalistic behaviors, these effects may outlive the pandemic. Gender-based violence has risen during these days. The unprecedented education emergency has come to existence. the cry of the refugees, internally displaced people, migrants, poor, abandoned people, slum dwellers, and more vulnerable to the pandemic, women and children, for help and assistance for their mere existence are much louder in third world countries even today. Our supply of medical help like personal protective equipment, PPE, hand sanitizers, soap, disinfectant sprays, masks, meals, dry rations, clothes, and even financial support may be a short-time response. If we are really interested in countering the issues, we should have short-time and long-time responses. The global imbalance of social and economic equity are growing daily with more lockdowns and the closure of all business activities. We are more important now than ever. With the world virtually shut down, we are forced to adapt to a new normal. The world is struggling to cope with growing unemployment and pay cuts. Socio-economic divide and inequalities has widened the marginalized communities from the rest of the world. COVID-19 continues to cost lives all over the globe. Food shortage could nearly double in the next year, and it will be just in 3 months in East Africa. The areas of concern for long-term responses could be maintaining critical health system, spreading correct and trusted messages on health issues, supporting the weak sex like women and children, funding the vulnerable families for their basic necessities, supporting the people with disabilities, helping the isolation and treatment centers of COVID-19, providing transport and unreachable places. Climate change and hunger is another area of concern to the global community today. Climate change is no longer the future threat, it's happening now. Extreme weather like floods, droughts, and storms could destroy homes, habitats, and livelihoods, and they are leading to the cause of hunger level in the world. The polarization of people towards cities and deserting the villages will lead to much more unsolvable problems. Yet another important area of our concern for brothers is education. Education is a fundamental human right for all children and youth. It creates the voice through which other rights can be claimed and protected. The extended school closures may cause not only loss of learning in the short term, but also further loss in human capital and economic opportunities over the long term. So we must work together to make our education system more resilient and be prepared to face the possible crisis in the future. By early April, all the countries had closed the institutions of learning, affecting over 91% of world students' population. Just more than 1.5 billion learners. The long-time closure of the institutions has forced the children to work and support their families economically. The return to learning, when the new normal comes to exist, may not take place 100%. So the empowerment of children, equitable access, safe and inclusive learning, equality of education cannot be guaranteed. Hence the families may opt the child to be out of school and the dropout ratio will go high. With these words of my reflections, I'm happy to welcome each one of you for a fruitful participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brother Hridayam, for that words of welcome, substantiated by reminding us of the context in which we live today as Montfortians, as brothers of St. Gabriel, as collaborators, as people who are tasked with the responsibility for our society and our people. Now we have Father Matthew Paikada. Father Matthew is a life member of the Order of Friars Minor, Capuchin, OFM camp. Currently, he is a missionary in a rural area in Chhattisgarh. He is a theologian by training. He has been a professor in theology and rector of their major seminary. He was also the minister provincial of their province. The recent Encyclical of Pope Francis, Fratelli Tuti, the world considers is a landmark document with great universal relevance in the context of the pandemic, but also beyond the pandemic. And in the context of this document, Father Matthew has written a great deal on it, has reflected a great deal on it, and he will speak to us on our role as catalysts of interreligious and intercultural dialogue, drawing inspiration from the encyclical, because that is a thrust area as far as our congregation is concerned. The last general chapter particularly emphasized on the intercultural and interreligious dialogue as a priority mission of the Brothers of St. Gabriel. Pope Francis deliberated on this in the encyclical Fratelli Tuti. Father Matthew.
Thank you, Brother Varghese. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, sir, it's fine.
Okay. So thank you very much for your kind introduction. I'm glad to be here with you all because as I know, Brother Varghese and some of his companions in Montfort community, you are all excellent in social work and real involvement with the people and their problems. And I feel very much privileged to be with you. And I, as a Franciscan, also feel closer to you as a brother. I'm Brother Matthew. And as missionary disciples, as Pope Francis would call us all, we are all united. And so I'm happy to speak something on the new encyclical of Pope Francis, Fratelli Tuti. And I would like to present it from the perspective of interreligious dialogue. So let me start right away. At times, an apparently insignificant incident in our life can have unprecedented consequence in our lives. The same is true of history too. What happens in the fringes of world history can assume unparalleled significance for the course of history. The meeting between Francis of Assisi, an adventurous and innovative religious vagabond, and the powerful but good-natured Malik al-Kamal, the Sultan of Egypt, at Damietta on the delta of River Niles in the year 1219, at the height of the Fifth Crusade, was such an incident. Although both were honestly serious about saving their souls, they were now engaged in a dialogue in order to save the lives of people from the atrocities of war. Although 800 years have passed, the relevance of that meeting never faded. Ever since, the essential link between saving one's soul and saving the lives of people remained the golden rule of authentic spirituality. No war is holy. No war can be just. No war brings success. No war can establish peace. Every war is born of hatred and breeds hatred. Every war is inflamed by lies and spread lies. Every war abuses religion. Every war takes our history of civilization back to barbarism. In his recent encyclical Fratelli Tuti, Pope Francis takes inspiration from this event to invite all, every person of goodwill, to think with him and join hands for the realization of justice and reconciliation, dignity and freedom, harmony and joy in the world of our times. He makes the expression of St. Francis his own and speaks of a way of life marked by the flavor of the gospel, leading humanity to a universal fraternal openness, transcending the differences of origin, nationality, color, or religion of the people. Pope Francis presents Fratelli Tuti as a social encyclical in the great tradition of his predecessors of Leo XIII, who wrote the Rerum Novarum, the first social encyclical, St. Paul VI, who wrote Populorum Progressio, St. John Paul II, who wrote Centesimus Annus, and quite a few others. However, Pope Francis sticks to his own inimitable style, which is direct and simple, at the same time persuasive in this encyclical. Now, coming to the salient features of Fratelli Tuti, let me try to give a short overview of the encyclical, mainly from the perspective of the interreligious dialogue and cooperation. Fratelli Tuti has 8 chapters and 2 prayers at the end of it, 287 paragraphs with 288 footnotes, out of which not less than half are from his own writings and talks. So it may be characterized as a summary of the papal teachings so far. In fact, the relevance of the encyclical will be clear when we read the first chapter, which gives a rather detailed analysis of the situation of the world today. In this chapter, titled Dark Clouds Over a Closed World, Pope Francis highlights the serious consequences of the divisive and isolationist tendencies growing stronger than ever in front of our eyes. In the situation of the Crusades of the Middle Ages, he sees a parallel to our times. When he writes, I quote, "We encounter the temptation to build a culture of walls, to raise walls, walls in the heart, walls on the land, in order to prevent this encounter with other cultures, with other people. And those who raise walls will end up slaves within the very walls they have built. They are left without horizons, or they lack this interchange with others." Quote ends. The revolutionary developments in communication technology and globalization actually did not usher in the promised global community in which everyone could take a legitimate share. Unfortunately, the technological and scientific progress did not lead to an egalitarian society in which dignity of every human life, whether rich or poor, literate or illiterate, healthy or weak, powerful or powerless, born or unborn, is respected and promoted, the Pope points out. The acknowledgement of this dignity is the basis of all service of justice and charity in Christianity. It is precisely here that we find dark clouds gathering over our heads and doors being closed to our fellow human beings. The so-called unproductive people are considered useless and a burden to society and family. This is a sign of severe moral decadence of our day. How can and how should the religions respond to this situation? This is the question that the Pope takes up in this encyclical. Religions are often accused of being the cause of much of the problems. Can they now be part of the solutions? That is a question that we have to take up, and that is what the Pope is speaking about. Now, coming to the next chapter, the Pope is providing us light. True Christian hope in a cloudy, desperate, and depressing situation is consumeristic. He invites and almost demands us to spread a ray of hope by providing the example of the Good Samaritan. However, it is interesting to note that Pope Francis is focusing on the stranger on the road who is robbed, wounded, and abandoned. That makes a big difference. The Pope gives extensive reflection on all the characters of this story, commenting on the priest and the Levite, in the story, the Pope writes, I quote, "It shows that belief in God and the worship of God are not enough to ensure that we are actually living in a way pleasing to God. A believer may be untrue to everything that his faith demands of him and yet think he is close to God and better than others." The quote ends. The Pope is here highlighting a case where religion failed. An open fraternal dialogue between believers in different religions can be mutually enriching for introspection and correction. Probably we need to remind each other this fact. Now, coming to the third and the fourth chapters, the Pope speaks on the need to envisage and engender an open world and to open our hearts to the whole world. The Pope speaks about the harm being done by the liberal capitalism and about the need to go beyond sporadic acts of charity and the urgency to engage in a true life of solidarity with the underprivileged, the impoverished, and above all, with the victims of injustice. Here, he uses the expressions political charity and social charity, which will have structural consequences in the society. Coming to the fifth chapter, the Pope continues with the theme of universal solidarity under the unusual title, A Better Kind of Politics. Now, better politics, the Pope says, should guarantee the dignity and justice of every human being. He introduces the term tenderness that indirectly conveys what we usually call the preferential option in liberation theology. Listen to his words. Politics too must make room for tender love of others. What is tenderness? Tenderness is the path of choice for the strongest, most courageous men and women. Amid the daily concerns of political life, the smallest, the weakest, the poorest should touch our hearts. Indeed, they have a right to appeal to our heart and soul. The quotation ends. Now, we know that the quality of democracy is measured by the security and equity enjoyed by the minority groups in a country. Otherwise, it will be autocracy of the majority. In fact, these people, the smallest, the weakest, and the poorest, and their concerns should become the matter of urgent concern for believers of all religions and non-believers alike. This precisely is the theme of the sixth chapter, where he speaks about dialogue, encounter, and friendship, contributing towards global fraternity and harmony. He gives a simple but comprehensive explanation for the term dialogue. I quote, approaching, speaking, listening, looking at, coming to know and understand one another, and to find common ground. All these things are summed up in the one word, dialogue. The quotation ends. Just as he introduced the term tenderness in the previous chapter, in his typical Franciscan style, the Pope introduces the term kindness into the context of dialogue and encounter. Kindness, he says, frees us from the cruelty that at times infect human relationships, from the anxiety that prevents us from thinking of others, from the frantic flurry of activity that forgets that others also have a right to be happy. Kindness ought to be cultivated. It is no superficial bourgeois virtue, precisely because it entails esteem and respect for others. Once kindness becomes a culture within society, it transforms lifestyles, relationships, and the ways ideas are discussed and compared. Kindness facilitates the quest for consensus, writes the Pope. Now, the seventh chapter is devoted to paths of renewed encounter characterized by reconciliation and compassion. However, it is significant that Pope makes it clear that every social conflict and protest cannot be condemned in the name of peace and forgiveness, because it may go against human dignity and justice. At the same time, Pope calls war and death penalty wrong answers and false solutions, even in extreme situations. He affirms an emphatic no to all arguments in favor of the so-called just war and death penalty. Now, coming to the concluding chapter, that is titled Religions at the Service of Global Fraternity, the Pope clarifies and affirms his position regarding the role of religion in the face of growing religious fanaticism, as well as antipathy, antagonism, and competition between religions. It is a clear affirmation that religions are not for their own sake. I would like to repeat it. Religions are not for their own sake. Just as church holds the position that church is not for its own sake, but for the sake of the realization of the plan of God here on earth. In the reign of God, in the plan of God, no one is a stranger and no one is superfluous. Believers in every religion should put their heads together and join hands for the welfare of all the people in this world. We are aware of the growing intolerance and resulting extremism causing division and violence in the society. We should not be reluctant to learn from history that every instance of the defense of the church was not always a defense of Jesus and his gospel. It is true that today, occasionally, we are faced with inhuman persecutions and malicious propaganda against the church. However, the Christian response cannot be to retort and to pay back with the same coin, but to stick on to the path of Jesus and his attitude, as we have it in Paul's letter to the Philippians, chapter 2, 4-8. We are called and we are challenged to follow him honestly, closely, although it will not be easy. Now, let me just share with you a little reflection on interreligious dialogue. The Catholic Church was fortunate to have an adjournamento, an updating on account of the Second Vatican Council. I'm inclined to say that the world would have been a much better place and in a much better equipped to deal with the present dilemma if all the religions and denominations had such a graceful possibility of self-renewal. What would have been the state of the church and its activities if not for the Second Vatican Council? One of the most significant contributions of the church in the Second Vatican Council was its reorientation to other religions of the world. Quoting from the Declaration Nostra Aetate of Vatican II, number 2, Pope writes, I quote, "The Church esteems the way in which God works in other religions and rejects nothing of what is true and holy in these religions. She has a high regard for their manner of life and conduct, their precepts and doctrines, which often reflect a ray of that truth which enlightens all men and women." The quotation ends. Is it not a position that can be shared by all other religions too? At times, the Christian initiative for interreligious dialogue was misunderstood and misinterpreted as an embrace of Dhritarashtra, the annihilation through a deceitful embrace. However, interreligious dialogue has to go on. The history of interreligious dialogue has been a slow and difficult but fruitful and necessary learning process. In the beginning, the attention was on a comparative study of the scriptures, and that did not make much headway. And afterwards, the attention was on a prayer, common prayer of believers in various religions coming together and praying together. And that also did not find much appeal. And then the third stage was actually people of different religions coming together to work together for the welfare of all, for the welfare of the society. So the history of interreligious dialogue, we find a shift of emphasis from the scriptural and dogmatic to the spiritual and social realms. Pope Francis quotes the words of the bishops of India. I quote, "The goal of dialogue is to establish friendship, peace, and harmony, and to share spiritual and moral values and experiences in a spirit of truth and love." This indeed is a constant challenge in front of us. Interreligious dialogue is not aiming at a creation of a world religion, definitely not. Every religion has its place, and every religion has contributions to make from its own resources, and that should not be forgotten, that should not be denied. It is a firm conviction that all the believers are praying to the same God, though in manifold ways, that inspired Saint Pope John Paul II to invite the heads of the world religions to come together and pray for peace and prosperity in the whole world. They were in fact praying, Loga Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu, as it is well expressed in our Indian Hindu tradition. We need to look far beyond the walls that separate and isolate us. The Pope instills hope in us with the words, "A journey of peace is possible between religions. Its point of departure must be God's way of seeing things. God does not see with his eyes, God sees with his heart. And God's love is the same for everyone, regardless of religion." Number 28. My dear brothers and sisters who are listening to me, I would like to say that we in Asia have a special responsibility with regard to the interreligious dialogue. All the major religions, all the major living religions in the world had their origin in Asia, and they are all still alive. The Muslims, the Hindus, the Christians, the Parsis, the Buddhists, people who belong to Judaism, Confucianism, Taoism, Shintoism, all these people all had their origin in Asia, and they are all living in Asia today also. So we have actually an added responsibility to be in the experiment field, to live together with other religions in harmony, working together for the welfare of the whole world, for the whole humanity, and show a way, show light to the whole humanity everywhere, wherever there is antagonism, fight, contempt between religions, etc. So there we have an additional responsibility, and I'm sure that in your response and your planning for tomorrow, you will definitely place accent on this. And from our experience, from our real day-to-day lived experience of neighborhood relationships between religions, we will be able to contribute to the world definitely a lot. Let us hope that there will be more light in this world and the clouds may disappear. I once again thank the organizers, especially Brother Varghese, for inviting me to share my thoughts. Wishing you everything best. God bless you.
Thank you, Father Matthew, Brother Matthew. That was a very insightful reading of the encyclical for us in our context. And the question that Pope Francis asked, can religions become the solution rather than the problem? This, I think, is an extremely important question. And can we stand together? Humanity, if humanity is to be restored to its destiny, we cannot be divided. Religions need to stand together with the best in us so that we are able to find solutions to the degradation of humanity that takes place, especially in the context of Asia, where all these religions have risen. And that aspect of solidarity and dialogue of life, I think this is the most important aspect. And the brothers in Gabriel are particularly privileged to be living through this dialogue of life in our mission. as educators, as people in social commitments, in counseling. This is our way of life, and I think this is a particular challenge for us. Not everybody likes this encyclical. In fact, I consider this one of the greatest social encyclicals we have had so far. I was reading this morning an article by Dr. Lawrence A. Frankel, who was the former Iran desk officer of the Secretary of Defense of the US, and he calls this encyclical a left-wing political tract. And that's the type of response or reactions that have been, that an encyclical like this that calls for peace, calls for justice, calls for dialogue, calls for the possibility of realizing another world. This is the type of reactions that have been there. So I think this is an important document of response to the present world, the post-pandemic world, that the Brothers of St. Gabriel and our collaborators have to particularly embrace in our mission together. So thank you, Father Matthew. Now I would invite Sister Kuchurani. Dr. Kuchurani Abraham is a feminist theologian, is a researcher, is a writer and trainer on issues related to gender, sexuality, spirituality, and ecological concerns. She is a former coordinator of Ecclesia in Asia. She is at the moment the Vice President of the Indian Theological Association and the interim convener of the Indian Christian Women's Movement. Most important, Kuchurani has been a lifelong seeker, willing to take risks, willing to shape new paradigms in consecrated life itself. And I think it is this particular aspect of Kuchurani being a seeker of new ways of living our consecrated life that makes her intervention particularly important for us. She will speak to us today on the challenges and opportunities that climate change offers us religious brothers. This is a theme that has very importantly come up in our general chapters in the last few years. And I think this is a theme that is extremely important for us in our mission. Kuchurani, please.
Thank you, Brother Varghese, for this kind introduction and for the invite. I feel honored to be with you all in these deliberations as you seek to understand what it means to be prophets and proclaimers of good news in a post-pandemic world. This initiative on the part of the Gabrielite Secretariat for Justice and Peace is commendable. It shows that you are seriously considering the challenges and opportunities before you as religious brothers. I'm happy to be part of this search as you look for ways to respond effectively to these challenges and opportunities. As Brother mentioned, I'm asked to speak on climate change and ecological concerns. In this short presentation, I'm not going to give you the details of the facts and figures about climate change. We shall first take a brief look at the undercurrents of this issue that will signal to the challenge and opportunities underlying the logical question. And then you can see how you would like to respond as individuals and as an institute that has a global presence. We are reaching the tail end of the year 2020. This year has been apparently seen as a perfect year to look at the earth, which is in the thick of the raging wildfires, record-setting storms, the fast melting glaciers, rising sea levels, and all these amidst the pandemic continuing its unbridled dance of death and destruction of health and economy across the globe. Scientists analyzing these trends observe that the different systems on Earth are tied together in an intricate pattern, and they raise the question, what happens when you pull on one thread? How does it affect something else? I think this is a very important question that you should keep in mind when you look for responses. What happens when you pull on one thread? How does it affect something else? The links between climate change and the coronavirus has been highlighted. by many observers and experts in this field. COVID-19 emergency has acutely overshadowed public reckoning with the climate crisis, and its reverberations will continue long after the first declining wave of infections. Further, it is noted that land use change and deforestation are primary global drivers of biodiversity destruction. They heighten the risk of further pandemics by bringing humans into contact with new threats such as the coronavirus. Every species lost is an irreversible event that decreases the resilience of natural and human systems on a permanent basis. All these observations make us deeply conscious of the intrinsic connectedness between human life and all other forms of life on this universe, which can serve to sustain life or destroy it. Whether the coronavirus COVID-19 emerged from Wuhan's open-air wet markets or some other source, what is evident is that it has deepened the vulnerability of the already fragile planet. It is acknowledged why viruses spill over when human environmental balance gets tilted. According to the latest report by the UN's World Meteorological Organization, the last 5 years have been the hottest on record, pushing global temperatures 1.1 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Among a cascade of alarming findings, the WMO points to sea level rise that continues to accelerate and now averages 4.8 millimeters a year, a trend that threatens to submerge vast stretches of coastal areas late in the century. And it is observed that even as the pandemic could lead to a temporary dip in global greenhouse gas emissions, this must not distract from the urgent need for rapid fundamental changes in infrastructure, energy, land use, and industrial systems to set us on a path to net zero emissions globally, latest by 2050. Confronted by the threats posed by the climate crisis, many governments around the world have already begun declaring a state of climate emergency. Climate emergency has been defined as a situation in which urgent action is required to reduce or halt climate change and avoid potentially irreversible environmental damage resulting from it. The UN Chief Antonio Guterres terms climate emergency as the central question facing the world, and it is termed as the final call to save the world from a climate catastrophe. Against this backdrop, I think we need to ask some fundamental questions. What is happening to this world today? What is happening to us as humans? Why have we reached a stage of climate emergency? Why are we heading for a climate catastrophe? To these questions, on the one hand, we can find easy answers from scientific records on the greenhouse gas emissions that have heated our planet and similar answers. But these answers would leave us unaffected. If you and I, who are non-experts in these matters, have to respond to this challenge, I think we need to be informed, but mere information will not move us. We need to go beyond mere numbers and rational conclusions to feel the pain of the earth. And that can happen only if we are awakened to a sense of being interconnected and interdependent to all forms of life on this planet. We will know the pain of the earth and its creatures then, in our guts and in our spirit. To my reading, the climate change crisis and the consequent ecological disasters are like symptoms of an autoimmune disease afflicting the body of the earth. Why do I call it autoimmune disease? Though there are different reasons why autoimmune diseases are triggered in the human body, prolonged stress and strain is certainly a reason why the immune system that is meant to protect the body caves in, leading to such disease. I can say this with conviction because I have known this in my own body on getting rheumatoid after going through considerable stress and strain at a certain phase in my life. I think we can say that similar to what happens to the human body over a shorter spell of time, could happen also to the body of the earth over a longer period of excessive stress and strain. Climate change could be taken as a symptom of such an autoimmune disease afflicting the earth. And if we do not take adequate care of the earth, the ecosystem could collapse on reaching a point of no return. I think this is the ecological concern that we need to wake up to. Yesterday, we looked at the issue of gender-based discrimination, and I think in addressing ecological concerns, we cannot bypass the gender question. Most of you here are men, and you may wonder, what is climate change to do with gender? Feminist environmental thought since the 1970s throws light on this. When French writer François Dumont coined the term ecological feminism in 1974, it served to bring to surface the deeper entanglements of gender and ecology. Ecofeminism explores the connections between the unjustified dominations of women and nature, critiques male-biased Western canonical philosophical views, which include assumptions, concepts, claims, distinctions, positions, and theories about women and nature, and calls for alternative solutions to such male-biased views. To illustrate this, I will take a linguistic example, since language is a powerful medium that reinforces gendered connections between woman and the earth. In my own mother tongue, Malayalam, I have heard from childhood the phrase, "Pennayal bhumiyolam shemikanam," often repeated. This means to say, a woman must be patient like the earth. And patience here is prescribed as an antidote in the face of suffering. Ecofeminism brings out the intricate connections between the violence of unjust, non-sustainable economic systems that afflict the earth and the growing frequency and brutality of violence against women, which has led to immense suffering. Ecofeminism shows how the structures of traditional patriarchy merge with structures of capitalist patriarchy to intensify violence against women and the earth. Linked histories of capitalism and colonialism bring out the global subjugation of women and nature, and so ecofeminists argue that no solution to ecological crisis will be realized within a society whose fundamental model of relationships continue to be one of domination. On the structures of domination, ecofeminist discussions make important critical observations about the Western philosophical tradition. In the dualistic positioning of male versus female and culture versus nature, it is noted that men have appropriated all that is associated with culture in terms of knowledge production, constructions of ideologies and belief systems, the creation of language, and particularly in defining what religion is all about, religion being one of the most powerful vehicles of culture. In the bargain, women have been identified with nature, the earth, all the more for the essentialized association of women with body and reproduction. While culture dominated by men was meant to be active and dynamic, rational and productive, female bodies and the earth were expected to remain passive and receptive, vulnerable to the exploitation by pleasure-seeking and profit-oriented masters of culture. Even as nature was clothed in cultural assumptions, idealized and romanticized Mother Bountiful, Mother Nature, endless source of nourishment and the like, nature was also considered irrational, chaotic, and mindless. It was claimed that vast tracts of wilderness was to be tamed or domesticated. The resources needed to be plundered and exploited for human enjoyment. Ecofeminists also argue that 17th century science could be implicated in the ecological crisis, the domination of nature and the devaluation of women in the production of scientific knowledge. Ecofeminists trace the historical roots of gendering of the earth to the heroes of English Renaissance like Francis Bacon and William Harvey, who deployed sexual imagery and sexual politics to structure empirical method as power over nature. Nature for Francis Bacon and everyone else in the Renaissance and scientific revolution was female. Bacon advocated extracting nature's secrets from her bosom. through science and technology. Feeding the Industrial Revolution were representations that liken nature as a woman waiting to be raped. The use of such vicious and violent imagery is reflected in the growth of mining industry in this phase. It was argued that women, just as a woman's womb symbolically yielded to forceps in taking the baby out, so secrets harbored in nature's womb could be wrested from her grasp through technology for use in the improvement of the human condition. The subjugation of nature as female was thus integral to the scientific method. One of Bacon's earliest, though posthumously published works, The Masculine Birth of Time, which was written between 1602 and 03, is subtitled The Great Instauration of the Dominion of Man over the Universe. For many ecofeminists, his words take a chilling significance as he wrote this at a time of the great European witch hunt, when many defenseless women were being tortured on a huge scale in order to extract the truth behind the powers that they exercised. Western philosophical tradition had taken reason as the quality that makes humans superior to non-human animals and nature, and it was assumed that there was an ontological divide between humans and other forms of life. This is being seriously questioned today. So also the hierarchical thinking that positions some humans as superior to others in the name of race, class, caste, ethnicity, or gender difference. Ecofeminists argue that an ecological revolution would entail new relationships between women and men, among humans, and between humans and nature. In this context, we need to problematize the naming of the current geological age as the Anthropocene epoch. The term Anthropocene has been assigned to the present era in view of the fact that human activity has become the dominant influence on climate and the environment. Feminist theorists have contested this, taking into consideration the increasingly unequal effects of climate change and the political and ethical responsibilities posed by it. They ask, how can an epoch be named after a species that is not equally responsible for its conditions throughout history? The difficulty to think of a universal, indigenous and non-industrial, non-Western culture while contributing to climate change are at the highest risk of violence from the effects of projects that continue to aggravate environmental degradation, as well as the increasingly violent social relations that accompany these projects. This issue is also raised not from the marginalized humans, but also from the perspective of the LGBTQI groups. And so the overwhelming singular question that feminism cannot stop asking is, whose Anthropocene? What I propose is a theology and spirituality of inner being, if we are committed to healing ourselves and healing the planet. Today, feminist seekers committed to spirituality and justice are unpacking the concept we inter are. It points to our existence as mutually constituted beings with the rest of creation. We become who we are in mutuality, in the give and take with other forms of life in this universe. Laudato Si alludes to this in speaking of our interconnectedness and interrelatedness with the rest of creation. Growing into the awareness of we inter are opens us to creation, which is non-hierarchical, poly-existence. Here there is no place for binaries, particularly the binary of the secular versus the sacred, man versus woman, human versus nature. Growing into the consciousness of our existence as interbeings, there is no other in the hierarchical sense who could be exploited to satisfy one's greed. We do not stand superior to another, but learn the art of respecting who or what is different. As interbeings, the pain of one affects the other, and there is space for mutual love and care. Defending the rights of the most vulnerable, less privileged, and marginalized makes sense in this identity construction of we inter are. This spiritual awakening is also at the core of the Christian economy of salvation. That is why Jesus could codify the law and the prophets into one single commandment of love. And in all simplicity, he could take the bread and break it, saying, "This is my body broken for you." Something that is celebrated as Cosmic Eucharist every day. What are the implications of becoming Venerer? Laudato Si reminds us of the urgency of caring for our common home. Caring has been conventionally gendered as women's task, as girls and women have been socialized to be expert caregivers in the family and in the church. Women have been assigned the title of workers for their roles as caregivers. Now the question which I would like to pose to you, particularly the men in this webinar, can we all be homemakers and caregivers? Moving beyond the gendered prescriptions of caregiving, care has to inform every aspect of public life, be it in the sphere of politics, economy, religion, and the like, so that decisions affecting the life of humans and the earth are taken carefully, causing no harm to anyone or anything. And we know that if development has to be sustainable and inclusive, there is no shortcut than to practice care economy. So, dear brothers and sisters, I am very convinced that healing the earth becomes possible not merely by cutting down greenhouse gas emissions. We need this spiritual revolution where we touch the Spirit of God, renewing the face of the earth through pluriform manifestations of life, through people of goodwill who take a stand for justice, peace, and integrity of creation, through people who become interbeing. And if we are convinced of this conviction will flow out of us in all our relationships and commitments, our apostolates, our engagements, in education of children and our work with youth. This is where you brothers, tomorrow when you look at your responses, you have to pay attention to what is your conviction about your at-homeness on this earth, and how do you transmit this to your students, particularly in the field of education. Because today, the United Nations has been very strongly promoting the agency of children. And I think the children are very, they are open to understand the wisdom of the interbeingness of the universe, as they are not conditioned to be hierarchical and dualistic in mindset as we adults are. So we can do a lot of work tapping this original beauty and innocence of children and youth. To conclude, these are the challenges and opportunities before you and me as we live in these chaotic times of climate emergency. Perhaps you need to ask in your own spaces how you are challenged as a faith community of brothers of Saint Gabriel, and what are the opportunities you perceive. What is the unique perspective you can bring as a global force of brothers committed to justice, peace, and integrity of creation? How would you respond to the call of the Spirit to become interbeings with the rest of creation? Climate emergency is surely saying aloud that the old systems and patterns of thought cannot sustain life anymore. So the question is, can we become the raw material for the new to emerge? In our response is our future and the future of this planet. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Coach Rani, for that very erudite and very insightful intervention. I think this has been great. Your expertise in climate issues and your expertise in feminism and feminist theology, you were able to so beautifully integrate. And I think it is important that theology and spirituality that you came up with, a theology and spirituality of interbeing, as that is sustainable, that can make life possible on this earth. I think that's a very important insight as brothers who are called to be brothers by our vocation, our very identity. Thank you, Kucharani. Now I invite Father Stani Laza, SVD. He is our first speaker. He had some difficulty entering in, but now he is in. Father Laza is the General Mission Secretary of the Society of the Divine Word, based in their generalate in Rome. He is a trained missiologist and was the former president of the International Association of Catholic Missiologists. I remember him as the director of Ishwani Kendra, the Institute of Missiology in Pune for many years. He was also the provincial superior of the SVDs of Bombay province. And Stani will speak to us today on how the church has responded to COVID-19, what has been its prophetic presence in the midst of COVID-19, how has the church been that witness and proclaimer of the good news that all of us are called to be in these times of the pandemic. Father Stan.
The COVID-19 and the church response. This is the topic which is given to me, and we are discussing about this during this particular seminar. In a short time, just to give you brief response, how the church looks at it. COVID-19 is much more than a health crisis. It is a human crisis. The coronavirus disease is attacking societies at their core. So therefore, we try to look at this response. I have divided into three parts. One is at intra, second one is at extra, and the third one is our response. What could be our response? That is the way I try to see this particular presentation. The first one is at intra. At intra, especially the spirituality. We prayed fervently during this coronavirus time. More devotions and reflections on sickness, sufferings, and death. Did anxiety, doubts, and selfishness overtake our beliefs? What does the Spirit really prompt us to deepen our spirituality? Just looking at intra, about our own, life as religious, as the church, as personal, different ways. As a community, the church, or we are thinking about ourselves, especially about our own community at this time, how we have responded, followed the instructions, the restricted travels and some immune boosters as well. We we are taking care of the elderly conference. We continued with all celebrations. A real danger is when we start accusing other, if someone was sick or someone is really bringing the virus into the community. But also, how did we really address the fear and anxiety and the lonely or elderly conference? So that is also another question that we could pose, especially to our own community. How much are we thought about the poor and the migrants during the lockdown as a community? Well, certainly we have done much, but could we have done more? And this is how I try to look at a little critically regarding this particular virus time or this particular pandemic. Thirdly, the leadership. Bishops and religious congregations issued statements, guidelines for worship, some on health concerns, encouraged their institutions for treating the sick, migrants, and street children. We have also proactive leadership, especially calling to smell the sheep. Mainly the provincials, the superior generals have sent out circulars. Then also, we have also worked well. Some of us also received what we call being corona warrior. They received even the honor from the government. I know from India, also from the other countries. Keeping close contact with the other leaders and people of other religions. Well, we can also raise a question how much we kept with people of other religions. Leadership, attitude to our infected confreres, how do we look at that? Or the other brothers and the confreres and our attitude towards infected and affected people. How do we handle them? We showed empathy through mails, also through personal talk or phone calls. The leadership had shown, we know very well, from our own experiences. I know from our experience here at the Generalate here in Rome, the SVD. Did our leadership address the racism, inequality, manipulation, which are the fallout of this particular coronavirus? We know very well, which is happening all over the world. But then did we really address those issues also? Did we address the administration, animation, and coordination concerns? Or we only concentrated only administration? I'm just raising some questions. This is not to say that some did or some did not do, but how could we really improve upon these particular three aspects regarding the leadership. Finally, COVID fund was set aside. The church had set aside, the religious congregation set aside. Certainly your congregation also has set aside. Immediate help was extended. Online donors were sought. There were many good Samaritans, donors in the West and the rest. We also know, from Mumbai, I know very well how many lay people really offer their donors. Our sacrifice towards this fund. Maybe you're looking at Indra. What is our sacrifice? I am aware that some of us really made some sacrifices. Compare our religious community. So in this time, we also look a little critically, compare our religious community as well as the family living outside. So our living standard and the people living outside, especially during this coronavirus. How have we set our finance mechanism, especially for our confreres, for their sickness, for their future, but also for our social ministries? How much or how we have set? I'm just raising some questions. Yes, some have set, probably some may not have set, or some may not have set even sufficiently. So this is just to give a few responses how we have done, especially during Ad Intra. Now coming to Ad Extra, this is where our strength is. The spiritual outreach, online liturgy services blossomed. The result, ritualism and clericalism. Now, is spirituality limited to priest-centered rituals or limited only to sacraments? Well, this is a question that we need to raise now. Days of prayer, saying rosary, and fasting promoted by Pope and the bishops. Good initiatives, certainly, we have done. But is spirituality confined only online services alone, or could we have done something more, different ways? There are a few countries, done something, different other things than what I'm mentioning here. I cannot mention everything here. In Philippines or in Africa, they have really reached spiritually, especially concentrating on families and family gathering, small communities and so forth. But what else could have done? Coming to the charity impulse, this is our core strength, loving God and loving our neighbor, So we distributed food, tried rations, sanitizers, kit, etc. Many other things we did. Certainly wonderful work the church has done, especially in Africa and Asia. I need not to name all of them, but you are aware of it, we are aware of it. But then there is also new poor which was emerging. That is, the middle class have become poor. All their savings are gone and they have become really poor, but they are ashamed to beg. How to help them? Caritas India, Chai and other NGOs, religious congregations extended help to the vulnerables. And Caritas India, we know that they received even an award from the government for the best NGO in the country, in India. Extended shelter and quarantine facilities as well as a psychological support. We did all these, sought the help of the others. Many dioceses and congregations in Asia, Africa tried to help the affected people. Did we reach out to help their rights, to protect their dignity and privacy other than the charity impulses? How did our institutions offer psychological support? Certainly we offered, but how did we do? Could we have done a little better? Therefore, I just asked this question, did we go beyond charity? Or we just stopped with the charity alone? Probably we have done, and certainly done few things, but then how could we do much better, especially in this line? Communication technology. Evangelizing through digital content was very active, liturgy, meetings, consultations through webinar, as we have now. We found physical distance is not really needed. COVID. A rebirth passes through inclusive technology for all. This is the invitations we have learned, and we have experienced. But what about those who don't have digital facilities? What alternative have we found? especially schools and universities. How can compassion be shown beyond digital world? This is also as important, raising question critically about our response to the people, especially during this COVID. Solidarity in action. COVID-19 is your bomb, the fuse is misery. This is the outline of what you call the committee which was set up by Pope Francis. And those committee members in Vatican, this is what they said. Realizing the importance as well as the difficulties we face now. COVID-19, building a healthier future. Vatican Dicastery has set this particular theme with 5 different areas, 5 different commissions to really realize this particular theme. Pope Francis actually are always stressed this during this crisis time. The global crisis requires the parameters of human coexistence be rethought through the lens of solidarity. So he was always asking and telling the world, stick together. The solidarity is the key to response. Therefore, we have seen, the earlier speakers have mentioned, and we have also read and understood the sense of Fratelli Tuti, which is a way to respond in this particular time, and we were trying. Pandemic revived the nationalism, racism, selfishness, and gaining personal profit. Let us not forget about this. We have experienced this in Europe. I know, we know very well the different countries, how they were closing the borders and not allowing the others to come in, and so forth. And the racism, and the way that the solidarity was actually blocked, especially these particular problems were gaining more ground. Therefore, concrete solidarity, working with other NGOs to reach out to the affected, and that was very much thought about it. Interreligious congregational approach, I think your congregation is doing, and there are many other congregations, even our congregation is doing, but could we do a little more on this? And ecumenical efforts were actually, I would say, minimum. Some have done, but we could have done still better. Some talks and webinars, but what we need is solidarity in action, not only just webinars alone, especially with the ecumenical groups in responding to this particular problem. We were reaching out to the other religions, helping everyone. We were trying as religious, as a church, but how far we went to get the help of other religions to work together, and that comes the solidarity. How have we addressed the problems of migration, poverty, and unemployment, etc.? Certainly, we have addressed this in some ways, but then we could also do better. UN called for the pandemic ceasefire. The church supported, certainly, of the pandemic ceasefire in Middle East or in Africa, in other countries, but the groups really adhere to this. Now, this is just to giving a kind of a spectrum of the responses. But what is more important, I would say, is what is our response now? How do we go about, now to really respond to the situations creatively? I tried to propose this particular paradigm of prophetic dialogue. You might have heard this, certainly, but I want to just emphasize taking this particular paradigm to really respond to this particular pandemic. Probably it might help as you see tomorrow or the later times how your congregation really wants to respond. Just want to explain a little bit on this. It is an attitude and spirituality being prophetic and dialogical. It is both. It is being prophetic and dialogical. This is a concept we have developed from 2020 onwards as an SVDs in our chapters. Later, it was gaining ground in the theological circles and the missiology orientations. Today, it is a commonly accepted term in the wider missiological world. Therefore, key to this particular paradigm, a practice rooted in spirituality, deep listening, deep respect for the context in which one does mission, deep contemplation and prayer with those with whom and among whom one works. And this is how the paradigm really works. Then the action comes afterwards. Therefore, I propose just 4 actions. And in a short time, just I hope to finish. 4 actions. Telling the truth first. It's a prophetic action of telling the truth. The ministry of telling the truth, like Jeremiah and Ezekiel and other prophets in the Old Testament, all the prophets here whom we have experienced, like Nelson Mandela or Gandhiji and so forth. The love of God. See, there is a love of God, telling the truth. This particular pandemic is not punishment. Therefore, being prophets who offer an optimistic message, remembering the misinformations about AIDS, about Ebola virus in Liberia, as well as the Congo. But we have to tell the truth. What is the truth about the virus? What is the truth about God during this particular time? And giving that particular love of God. Therefore, misinformation abounds in this pandemic as well. We have heard from Donald Trump earlier, don't worry, it will go away. It's a misinformation, we know. The church has to tell the truth, like what I call the political leaders like Donald Trump and Jair Bolsonaro from Brazil. They try to manipulate the current crisis for their own benefit. When Trump scattered the protesters and visited the national shrine, both the Episcopal Bishop Pude and the Catholic Bishop Gregory, now he is a cardinal, spoke the truth. Charare, the misuse of sacred place. So this is telling the truth. We tell the truth to the people, to the leaders. So telling the truth about women's oppression, telling the truth about clerical abuse and clericalism itself, telling the truth about persistent racism, white privilege, caste privilege, about the plight and rights of the migrants, about the immigrant danger to our planet, about the truth of history from the perspective of indigenous peoples, aboriginals, Dalits, Afro-Americans, etc. Therefore, telling the truth about the people, about present situations. Andrea Bartoli from San Egidio community in Rome, you might have heard this particular community. He was telling, I'm not going to read this, just to give, he is one of the what he call commission members of the task force of Vatican. He said, tell the truth, especially tell the truth in the schools and universities. This is our mission, he said. The second point is of what he call offering hope, a prophetic action of offering hope. What the future is, we do not know, but more accessible healthcare, offering hope, greater efforts of anti-racism, greater preparedness, especially of the church, of our organizations, NGOs, or congregations, affordable education, a less arrogant and selfish West, and the inspiration of doctors and nurses. Nearly 400 priests died in Europe. In Italy, more than 120 priests died. And also, of course, the nurses and the doctors, number of them. A Sri Lankan theologian, Jay Seelan, is a clerist. He says there is a future beyond the pandemic. So therefore, we have to tell the people, there is a future. Just I read this morning, there is Philippines has proposed a Red Wednesday, giving hope. It is a kind of a concept giving to the people. Therefore, Holy Spirit is hard at work, inspiring artists, inspiring scientists, inspiring ordinary people. This particular hope we need to give. This could be one of our responses. The signs of hope in collateral grace. We have heard about collateral damage, but then it is a collateral grace. That means God gives grace through different ways, and we can do it. And this is our prophetic message. Work against injustice. This is normally we understand prophetic way of life. The pandemic has uncovered, revealed the great injustices in many, especially the poorest parts of our world. We have ignored or culpably ignorant. But then people in the whole earth community need proper health care. They need financial and food security and political stability. Bishops in Philippines called for really a prophetic voice of giving strength to the community, and they need we need people who can really recognize their racial, cultural, and sexual orientation, the dignity. So we need to really give this particular aspect. WCC, the World Council of Churches, had said exigency of systemic change, which is needed during this particular pandemic time. Pope Francis said find cure for human and socio-economic viruses. So therefore, fighting against injustices is important. What is happening, in India, I occurred very much, also in other countries, in Africa, also in Asia, corruption. Corruption during pandemic is a double flow. They are sucking the blood of the poor. They are sucking the simple money, little money they have during this pandemic. Therefore, work against injustice. The Pope calls for solidarity to confront the epochal change. This is the message he delivered during Easter. And he said, there is an epochal change. We need solidarity to counter this. This is a fourth one, sustainable human development. Kochurani had just now talked about it. But this is also prophetic action that we need to do in response to this pandemic. Virus has taught how we have harmed the nature, exposed the imbalance of the development. A sustainable future is possible if governance changes. Therefore, if governance changes, certainly sustainable. 2020 has been declared as Love That the Sea, and Vatican has worked out the real way of doing what we call the future programs. Therefore, the rights of nature, and this is the paradigm we need to work on. And this is another way of responding to the pandemic time, especially as religious congregations. Sustainable human development expose the cry of the earth, the cry of the poor, the efforts of the pandemic and the ecological crisis, the injustices and the inequality, the violence. Some act according to sustainable human development paradigm. This is prophetic. We need to act upon it. And that action will really carry the weight. Can our educational ministry show alternative? Okay, now, in other words, can our congregation show alternative? So prophetic, this is my last slide. Prophetic actions, it is also is important in this element of showing constructive alternative. I participated yesterday's seminar. Brother John, in his inaugural address, he mentioned this, show constructive alternative. Prophets are not only to speak against or speak for, but also showed through their lives, and they showed there is an alternative. Can our congregation do this? Not everybody is a prophetic figure, but everybody needs to listen to the prophetic voice around us and also within our congregation. I think it would help, especially as you discern tomorrow or other days regarding what are your actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Stanley, for that very insightful intervention, telling the truth, offering hope, work against injustice, sustainable human development as our constructive prophetic responses. In fact, I was looking at a demonstration of care and offering hope has been the response of the Christian community in every epoch during every pandemic. And I just wanted to read a very short paragraph from St. Eusebius, Bishop Eusebius, the historian, the Bishop of Caesarea in the 4th century. This is what he said. For they alone, that is the Christians, in the midst of such ills, showed their sympathy and humanity by their deeds. Every day, they continued caring for and burying the dead. When there was no one to bury the dead, when dead bodies were strewn on the streets, for there were multitudes who had no one to care for them. Others collected in one place those who were afflicted by the famine throughout the entire city and gave bread to them all, feeding the hungry, so that the thing became reported abroad among all men, and they glorified the God of the Christians. And one of the secrets of how and why Christianity grew in the Roman Empire, they say, is the way they responded. The Christian community responded, and the Christian leadership responded to pandemics, pandemic after pandemic. So I think this is something that we need to re-examine. Pandemic, COVID-19 is not going to disappear in a hurry. How we as religious brothers respond to the pandemic going beyond feeding the hungry to be prophetic voices of hope. Thank you, Stanley, for that very insightful intervention. Now I call upon, now we are going really into specific responses. Montfortian response as brothers was in Gabriel. I call upon Dominic Yoko. Dominic Yoko is the director of Montfort Center in Singapore. He has served as the provincial superior of the province of Singapore, Malaysia, and director of Montfort schools in the country, that is in Singapore, for a long time. He is a retreat director and counselor of the young, and he will speak to us on the specific Montfortian response in a post-pandemic world. Dominic.
Thank you, Rev. Varghese. Yeah. So good evening to all of you, or good afternoon for some of you, and good morning for many others. Yeah. I'm glad that Varghese has granted me this opportunity to share with you this evening. Talking about Montfortian response, I suppose it's a challenge. I tried to go through it, and of course, Montfort has not experienced COVID-19. So I think our responses will have to be taken from our inspiration that we received from him. Yeah. What COVID-19 has done for us is it has changed our world. And our world has definitely changed and will continue to change. There's no doubt about it. So we know that this world that we experienced before this, or even earlier this year or last year, is not going to be the same again. And while we talk about recovery from COVID-19, we know it's not about going back to business as usual, but rather there'll be a new normal that we have to expect. So that itself, firstly, how different will our life and society be after this pandemic? What do we foresee in the post-pandemic era? What really will happen? It's really an unknown question, I must say. And how will these changes impact on the least among us? We talk about the last, the lost, and the least. The least among us, how are they being affected? I think it's been shared by some speakers before, so make my job a little easier. Yeah, and will these changes, or will this situation change the way we respond as Montfortian? How will it change us as Montfortians? So with this question as a backdrop, I will work on this as I go along. Yeah. How different will our life and society be? Firstly, learning and teaching will change, and so will schools be relevant anymore? Schools that we know up to now, will that be relevant for the future? You know, many places schools have been closed down. We have heard Brother Irodem earlier talking about the impact of that on schooling and learning and the children, and even some OECD talk about the impact of this will extend way beyond the decades to come, because the students who are in our schools now, when they go out into the world of work, this pandemic experience will affect how they're going to respond to the world of work. And so that will affect our society, our economic and social environment. Firstly, also, no country can act unilaterally. We have learned from this COVID-19. No one can. Some tried. I know some presidents tried, but it's a total failure. They are now among the top 10 in the world. And therefore, what is needed for us is to act multilaterally, that we cannot work on all this all by ourselves. So to survive, we need to be interconnected, more collaborative than competitive. So collaboration is part and parcel. We may not look at big national or state level, but even just at an individual level, an individual institution, an individual community, we got to realize that we are highly interconnected. Doesn't matter where or which part of the world we are, there's this interconnectedness that we cannot run away. And COVID-19 shows us exactly that. Of course, we paralleled that earlier by our sister Kochirani, talking about how the planet Earth and all is, we are connected. We cannot run away from nature. We human and nature are one. Then the world of work will be transformed, and it will change how we educate our students for a job of the future. I think Brother Irudam has alluded to that a bit earlier. I think that has been something that we have to think about quite seriously. What are we teaching our children today? Are we preparing them for the Industrial Revolution 2.0 and at best Industrial Revolution 3.0? I think even Industrial Revolution 4.0 may not be what we are looking at as the world of work to come. Maybe it's an Industrial Revolution 5.0 yet to come. So what do we foresee in this post-pandemic era? First, the gap between different sectors of society will widen even more. We've already seen that income gap, which was widening, but the pandemic shows us that this is very wide now. In practically all countries, whether they are capitalistic or communistic countries, we are all experiencing that income gap between people, for example. And also, in response to a pandemic, people and countries will tend to be protectionist. Their approach will be more protectionistic than opening up to others. And we know that national and international response has been weakened through this pandemic. So it's now back to the people, the grassroots, to come together and do something about their situation. Every government, however we can see how big the country is, they are top on the list, and they are grappling with this response, this pandemic. And we say that the recovery will likely be a W-shaped recovery. It's already being shown. That is no longer, we usually traditionally say it's a U-shaped recovery. It may take longer than usual, like the case of SARS that we experienced 17 years ago. The recovery was much shorter, but now it looks like the W is more than the W, it's a wavy recovery. We're already experiencing second spike in Europe, in many other countries. India, well, we're still spiking the first one. They're coming down a little bit, but they might spike up. But many countries in the region experience a second spike. And we think a third one will come, and the worst one will come after that even. So this is the reality that we have to confront ourselves with in this post-pandemic era. The gap between different sectors will widen. So it's not only income gap, but also our social relationship between people, different groups of people, different people from different socio-economic classes. There's a greater gap beyond just the wealth or the income gap. So, but firstly, income inequality in most developed countries has increased over the last 50 years from the Gini coefficient that's been reported. Practically most of the developed countries have experienced a widening income gap, or we sometimes call it the wealth inequality, not only income inequality. So thus the rule of business transaction has to change to ensure that the lower income group has a say in economic policies. Up to now, I think a lot of economic policies are determined by those who have the wealth, determining how it's going to be. And then income inequality is a process of economic growth, but the widening gap will lead to reduced trust, unrest, oppression, etc. I think some of speakers have elaborated on this. Now, how will these changes impact on the least among us? This is one of my greatest concerns, and I think it's a concern for us as Montfortian. It says that migrant workers who were left stranded and living in deplorable conditions were badly affected during the pandemic. We see that in countries like Singapore, India. We've read a lot of reports of the tremendous and terrible effect on the internal migration from the north of India to the south of India to work, and the movement back when the window was open, but the tremendous effect on the people, especially the migrant workers, because they're not protected. They're left on their own. Their support system is not with them, it's back home, far away. So these are tremendous things that really worries us. School closure has also widened the gap in educational level between those in emerging and developed economies, different countries. Some countries has closed now almost for a year. I know in our context here, Philippines has closed for a very long period. Myanmar started a little later, but they also have been closed also for the most part of this year. Singapore schools have been open because the government insisted on that, and with great precautions. Yeah, but that again shows the gap that is happening between different countries. And so with economic fallout, it will have effect on issues of child labor and even child marriage. This is a report from the Nikkei, Asian Nikkei from Japan. There will be more incentive to work and earn rather than to study and learn. So children returning back to schools are not that promising. We see that in our schools in Philippines, where enrollment for the new academic year in August, the older students, fewer are coming back to school. The irreversible impact of COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 pandemic is like a strong natural disaster sweeping through our land. Nothing is left unturned. And unfortunately, this time it is worldwide. Almost hardly any countries were spared from it. So there are unknown questions of how the pandemic will change in our societies, or how it will change our societies. Will education move to being online more than face-to-face? Or will it be blended, as they will call it? Can we continue to work from home? Who are those most affected by not being able to work from home, for example? The people who are working in certain kind of labor work are not able to work from home. The cleaners, the waste collectors in our cities, they cannot work from home by operating a vehicle from their house. There's no way at all. Now, changing the way we respond as Montfortian, this is probably something that we now need to look at. First, will we move to the new periphery? Not the old periphery anymore. There are new peripheries that are being shown up now. Are we prepared to move to the new periphery? How do we survive the impact of the pandemic? Do we need to change the way we do our mission? Are we prepared to change our lifestyle to be relevant to the new era? Now, moving to the new periphery, Montfort says, those whom the world rejects must move you the most. So we are called to help those who are the most affected negatively by this pandemic, especially our migrant people among us, not only the migrant workers, but also refugees who could not return back or could not go to any other country, who have been locked down in their host country, and who were not supported. They'll be the last people that the country will be thinking of. They are least protected, and being far away has no immediate support. The low-skilled workers, the daily wage earners, and the frontline workers need our support as they face hardship from loss of income and employment and social and family life. So the invitation for us as Montfortian is go where our deepest call is answering the greatest need of our world. So the call of our 32 or 32nd general chapter in Acts 5.3, call to have a prophetic age necessary to embrace the marginalized, critique the dehumanizing elements of the dominant cultures, counter gender discrimination, and offer alternative paradigms. To realize the Montfortian preferential option for the poor through well-considered plans, programs, and resources. I think when they wrote this, they did not think about COVID-19 yet, yeah. But I think the reality has set in, and it is a good call for us to make a response. Firstly, surviving the impact of the pandemic. COVID-19 has highlighted the world's biggest challenges of our time, climate change and mental health. It is said that 65% of our primary school children today will be working in job types that do not exist yet. According to Dell Technologies report, 85% of the jobs in 2030 have not been invented yet. So what does that say to us? So I think these are things that we have to look at. How do we go through this pandemic in the wake of the challenges that it is confronting us? Climate change and mental health. COVID-19 heightens for us that we are globally interconnected. That's what it is doing. And therefore, the issues, I think, has been explained by other speakers on climate change and more so on mental health. Because of the lockdown, a lot of people have gone through mental breakdown, depression, attempted suicide, and some have managed to commit suicide. Suicide rates has gone up. So human relationship is an important component of our human living. We need one another. Therefore, we have to be connected with other human persons. And because of this pandemic condition, we began to be isolated. I think speakers before me had spoken about that, especially the elderly, who are very much isolated on their own. And even the young, and even the not so young. I think we are all being affected by the lockdown, the isolation that we experience. And this can create mental health issues. Now, in our Montfortian Education Charter, I just quote two small parts. It says, as disciples committed with Christ in the struggle for the kingdom, which is from our Rule of Life, number 9, living in the world as members of the human family. So it reminds us that we are living in the world as members of the human family. We are all interconnected. So develop a culture of life and well-being in the educational milieu and programs so that students are enabled to handle situations of stress and personal crises with patience and maturity. I think Sister earlier talked about, the Malayali quote, that woman should be as patient as the planet Earth, as the world. Okay, so maybe maybe not that kind of patience, but the ability to be resilient, to go through the difficulties, the challenges, the isolation that they're going to experience. So traits that's needed for us to be future ready. I mean, competencies for the fourth industrial revolution. We'll just kind of look at it very quickly. Firstly, personal skills. We need to develop this resilient and being resilient and nimble or adaptable or flexible to strengthen capabilities for responding to various crises and having the ability to implement them quickly, to respond quickly. How many of us responded to COVID within the first month or two? Or did we take 5 months or 6 months before we make our first response? So being resilient and nimble is very necessary. It says, to be transformed into a flock of peaceful sheep, a flight of pure doves and royal eagles, a swarm of honeybees, a herd of nimble deer, and the pride of bold lions. It's taken from the Prayer for Missionaries by Montfort, number 18. That we are called to become nimble as the deer and bold as lions, to be able to glide through or to be resilient in the midst of the pandemic. And our Rule of Life number 10 kind of invites us to look at, says, you are free and totally available. You can therefore be bold and dynamic and rush where God beckons to meet the urgencies of man's needs. And what is man's needs in this era, or this post-pandemic era that's coming, that's confronting us? Am I bold and dynamic to rush where God beckons? I think Montfort used this word rush quite a lot, He says that Mary is the spouse of the Holy Spirit, and where Mary is, the Holy Spirit rushes to the soul who has Mary in her, or hasten, sometimes some translator would use that in the true devotion to Mary, or the secret of Mary also. Next aspect is social skills, to support one another in their struggle, to break down the social isolation and to give human support. to develop collaborative skills and a bridging leadership, to be interconnected. We know that Montfort would organize people according to their needs into various confraternities in his time, in various places, in Poitiers and so on. He says he organized the Friends of the Cross, for example, the White Penitents, and also Association of Students, the brother of Blessed Mary Louise Trichet, Alexis Trichet. He organized them, and many other groups he has put together to really strengthen the community and strengthen people. And I think this is the time for us to organize people. This is a holy practice in order to safeguard and increase the good brought about by the mission. That's from the Sacred of the Rosary. Effective communication, love with your heart and hand and not simply with your mouth. Friendship which is only in speech is a ridiculous decoration. This was the guiding quote for our last general chapter. So authentic communication will be effective. If not, it will be useless. Learn to speak from the heart and to bring about action. If not, it is all emptiness. In the wake of COVID-19 pandemic, it shows up the materialistic and individualistic values of our age. Montfort is both a challenge and an alternative. It's a witness to an encounter with God in the concreteness of one's life and of history. So transit to the digital platform. If you don't take risks for God, you will do nothing great for him. To change up teaching, to nurture thinking rather than to dish out instruction. Being locked down has gotten schools to move into the digital platform for teaching and learning. So the role of educator will need to move towards facilitating young people's development as contributing members of society. And to end this, I would say what we need is a concerted action, a solidarity as mentioned by some other speakers. See, the brothers collaborate with the concerted action of educators, parents, and other professional bodies whose purpose is the cultural, social, and technical development of the country. They try to involve the young in this work. While fulfilling their mission as educators, the brothers manifest their solidarity with all those struggling for justice. That's our Constitution number 92. Thank you very much, and I hope you have enjoyed this conference as I do, and we'll see more of it tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominic. We all enjoyed it. You had your very characteristic way of presenting it. You brought home to us the Montfortian legacy from his writings, from our traditions, from our role of life, from our general chapter documents. Thank you, and those 6 very important competencies that we need to develop for the future. Being resilient and nimble, the ability to rush the social skills necessary, the ability to communicate effectively, and the importance of transiting to the digital platform that is the platform of the future, and concerted action on behalf of those whom the world rejects. I think it was a very beautiful presentation. Hopefully we will be getting all these papers. We intend to bring out a book with all these papers. I am requesting all the speakers to send me their presentation so that we can really publish it, because these interventions are of great importance, especially as it comes from the times of the pandemic. So thank you very much, Dominic. And we have the last but not the least speaker, Brother Paul Raj, dealing with the core of our vocation as religious brothers. Brother Paul Raj is the principal of Vidyadeep College of Theology in Bangalore. He has served on the international leadership team of the congregation and also has been the Global Executive Secretary of the Gabriel Secretariat for Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation. We are very happy to have you, Brother Paul Raj. Over to Brother Paul Raj.
Greetings to all of you. Since I see a very mixed group of listeners, not only brothers here, I see many our teachers of our schools and some collaborators. So I shall make this short sharing very general, not specifically addressing the brothers only. So that is my first observation. Secondly, I see people from different parts of the world. So I shall also make it, try to make it a little more universal in the context of this presentation. So the challenges and response as religious brothers or as collaborators, collaborating with these religious brothers in their institutions. How are we called for a commitment to greater brotherhood and sisterhood, especially in this context? So in my view, the response of these brothers and those who are collaborating with the brothers in the pre-pandemic, during the pandemic and post-pandemic world is not radically different. The challenges are more. So the challenges are more now. So the response has to be more intense and more coordinated. And commitment has to be more forthcoming. But very specifically, the Montfortian Gabrielite response has to make a transition from welfare model to rights-based approach. This is very, very important. Distributing food, giving some money, giving some kit, etc. All these comes under a welfare model. Now, UN will talk about HRBA, Human Rights-Based Approach. HRBA. This is the model internationally they are proposing. Now, what they say, and everybody agrees, any NGO would agree, a human rights-based approach leads to better and more sustainable human development outcome than any welfare-based model. So you will notice in all the Montfortian Gabrielite responses and responses of any of our schools, any of our collaborators, I think vastly we have been stuck with this welfare-based approach, which is not sustainable. This is the first observation I have to make. Now, let us come to what has been our inspiration. In the wonderful church document in Pope John Paul II, the Saint John Paul II, he brought out called Vita Consecrata, that is a consecrated life, the important document. In that article, for the first time, the Catholic Church spoke about the religious brothers in 2 articles. Out of that, in one article, number 60, there is 2-3 sentences are most powerful. I think this is the first time the Catholic Church has officially spoken to these religious brothers. They say the word brother suggests very rich spirituality. Why? Because these brothers are called to be brothers of Jesus Christ, number 1. Number 2, they are called to be brothers to one another. Number 3, they are called to be brothers to everyone. And number 4, they are called for a greater brotherhood. So I am supposed to focus on this last one. So this greater brotherhood is what we need to see, especially how we have been responding, especially as teachers and other collaborators in the Montfort schools all over the world, as the admirers and friends of Montfort brothers, and as Montfort brothers, or as sisters who are collaborating with the Montfort brothers. We all of us come under this term called greater brotherhood or greater sisterhood. The church has always been very exclusive language they have been using. That is why only brotherhood they have used. So I'm adding sisterhood. Now, these pandemic times or the post-pandemic times, they are calling out for establishing really a greater brotherhood and sisterhood in the church, in all our institutions, and in the world. So in the earlier 4 sharing, we have listened how the Montfort brothers and the others have responded. So I will not touch upon that. I am going to speak under 3 very small headings, how the brothers and the collaborators of the Montfort brothers and the others can respond under 3 headings. Number 1, vast majority of the brothers' congregations are involved in education mission. And to that, the Montfort brothers and Gabriel also largely involved in education mission. That is number one. So how the response of these brothers and the others leading to greater brotherhood can be under this education mission. Number two, under evangelization. It involves many areas. Number three, societal transformation. So how the Montfort brothers have been responding all these years, I have put them under these three headings. Let me take the first one. This educative mission, the challenges in educative mission, the way we have responded and the way we could respond. Number one, education to handle or manage a crisis. Did these Montfortian educational institutions equip their men and women, including teachers and the students, with a tool to handle this crisis called the pandemic? Or we were busy with online classes only? In what way a Montfortian Gabriel educational system come out creatively with a methodology to handle this pandemic for the students and for the teachers? Resilience, how we made an effort, or education to find meaning and solution during a crisis like this COVID-19 or the post-pandemic. We are no different from the governments and the corporate groups who have responded to this with online classes, online fee collection, and online sum methods. And as many said, 52% of, at least I'm talking about the Karnataka state where I am, 52% of the students in the schools in Karnataka did not have access to equipment, to network, to technology, and to any facilities to attend online classes. Now, as educators, Montfort Gabriel educators, have taken this fact into account to take a statistics of how our online education or any education or a tool to handle this crisis have reached this. I was reading yesterday, Shakespeare wrote this masterpiece Macbeth during a pandemic, it seems. During pandemic, he wrote two classics. One was Macbeth. And we read in the papers, quite a few NGOs have come out in an extraordinarily creative way to cater to the needs of the marginalized during this pandemic. I will explain it later. The second part under that education is the FSG pedagogy. FSG, the Montfort Brothers pedagogy. The manner and style, our manner and style largely resembled the government and the big private players in education. Any creative or socially empowering models did we think out? Did we manifest during such emergency, during such lockdown period? Did we have anything at all? Or like the government, we went the government way? The same usual educational pedagogy, online classes, online exam, online office works like others. I think this is very, very important. Do we have a Montfortian Gabrielite educational pedagogy to respond to such situations? The second, I come to the second one, the evangelization. The challenges and response in the evangelization mission. Under that, number one, collective witnessing as a congregation or as a province or as a community or as a school. How much and how effectively we have been witnessing during these times. That is, brotherhood or sisterhood beyond boundaries. Beyond boundaries. This Fratelli Tuti document will talk about that. Number two, under that, in our evangelization initiative, when I say evangelization, it also includes education, all the other missions that we are involved in a collaboration with all our collaborators and associates, well-wishers, in all our evangelization initiatives. What has happened so far? What has been our responses besides some financial help given by some persons here and there? Some NGOs have gone far beyond boundaries and have participated not only in welfare efforts, but have shown very great initiative. I'll give a simple example. There is an NGO in Bangalore, not a religious NGO, who have done a survey, very massive survey of about 80,000 migrants, a survey. They have accompanied them on their route and they have resettled them. Number two, there are other private players have done an awareness on health and hygiene. There is an NGO who trained the farmers online. Many farmers were committing suicide. They went after these farmers, gathered them, gave them online training and online solace and comfort. There were some groups who were busy during this pandemic time in creating a toolkit for the differently abled children, how to manage this pandemic. There were some organizations who were preparing guidelines for the parents and for the students during this pandemic and post-pandemic, how to handle. Unimaginable. These are not religious groups. These are ordinary private groups. There were quite a few groups got involved in advocacy, preparing future strategy, post-pandemic, guidelines for online learning, especially guidelines for online learning for the marginalized. Now, these are called human rights-based approach to an emergency or a pandemic situation like that. Point number 3 under this second evangelization is, we also need to speak of the anxiety and the silent participation of, let me talk about the Montfort brothers, nearly 300 retired and sick brothers of the Brothers of St. Gabriel all over the world in our retirement homes. I was taking a statistic yesterday. In India, we have almost 96 retired brothers in Indian provinces, the sick and retired. I am sure in the world, in the 33, 34 places where we are working, the countries put together, we may have about 200 plus. So about 300 plus retired, semi-retired and sick brothers of St. Gabriel all over the world. Now, this is very important. These men who have toiled hard and now who are in the retirement homes, it is important their individual and collective witnessing their fears, their anxieties, their moments of doubt, their hope, and their death. We have many of them who have passed away. All this is a real challenge for us as we think about a response. So our responses as the Montfortian Gabrielite collaborators and as Montfortians in these critical times have to be inspired by these hopes and doubts of these elderly men. The third point, the last one, societal transformation. We can call it as a JPIC, justice, peace, and integrity of creation. Under this, the first point is this pandemic time surely necessitated welfare approach. In most cases, we need to respond immediately. And we as Brothers of St. Gabriel were largely involved in welfare approaches at the base level. But we also have here and there quite a few brothers and organizations into rights-based approach. But largely as a congregation, we are yet to move, and even as institutions, yet to move into HRBA model, human rights-based approach, that level and advocacy. This has not really caught up with us. As a result of this conference, I am very hopeful that we have to make this shift from welfare-based base model methodology to human rights-based approaches. The second point in this is this latest document, Encyclical from Rome, Fratelli Tuti, it is more pertaining to us. Our name has been used as a title of this document. And this is actually Pope Francis, a renewed social teaching of the church. It's a renewed social teaching. And we Brothers of St. Gabriel and our collaborators can learn a lot, especially about our challenges in this. And this particular encyclical is a continuation of Pope Francis' teaching of Catholic social teaching. He speaks about commodification of natural resources. He talks against that. And he also says in this document, fraternity, which means brotherhood, is not just a feeling. It is not just an emotion. It is an action. The Pope also very interestingly changes the word fraternity into a political message. This is very powerful. He actually gives a new twist to this word from fraternity to a political message, what we call justice, peace, integrity, creation. The fact that Pope Francis has taken inspiration for this encyclical from outside the church. One grand imam, a Muslim, he has taken from Orthodox Church. He has taken from outside. He has quoted a Indian Bishops' Council. He has quoted his own homilies. Much less he has quoted many earlier church documents. It's very interesting. It is out of the ordinary. It's a very revolutionary. I think it's very important is to understand the Pope has used the word universality 55 times in this document. Universality, that is beyond boundaries. So the public role of the church, public role is, the Pope is talking in Article 276, the public role of the church is commitment on justice. The public role of the church is the commitment of the churches for justice. I think this is very important. The last point, our educational system, especially the FSG or BSG, Brothers and Gabriel, our evangelism efforts, our societal transformation have to be seen, all these three, as the integral part of our brotherhood or sisterhood mission and lifestyle. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brother Paul Raj. I think a very fitting ending to our 2 days conference, particularly emphasizing on this opportunity that we have to move from a welfare model into which we have grown the last 300 years and more of the education mission, evangelical mission, social transformative mission of the Brothers of St. Gabriel to a rights-based approach, a political approach, an approach that structurally transforms our society. So thank you very much, Brother Paul Raj. Sisters, brothers, participants from all over the world who joined us in the last 2 days, thank you very much. 10 speakers we had during these last 2 days, I think has given us a great volume of insights, information, and possibilities of transforming ourselves as a congregation. During the pandemic, yes, because we don't know when the pandemic will end, but I think beyond the pandemic. And this is a visioning process that we, all of us, as individuals, as institutions, as religious communities, as a congregation as a whole, need to embrace with passion. We are in the process of rewriting our role of life, rewriting our constitution. And I think this pandemic has come to us as an opportunity as to how do we see ourselves 30 years from now, 40 years from now, 50 years from now, as people as decided by Montfort, as people decide by God, as disciples who are radical, who are committed, who are passionate. And I think that is the mission that we have, and these 2 days of insights that we receive gives us a huge amount of ideas, vision, transformative processes. And I think this is what we hopefully, as the leadership of the congregation, gathers today to deliberate further on what we have done so far, to come up with very concrete strategies, very concrete action plans that can be translated into action and transformation in each of our provinces all over the world. I want to thank each of you who participated, who are here. I especially want to thank Stani, Matthew, Kochirani, Dominic, and Paul Raj, who were the speakers today, and the collaborators who joined us, and especially the leadership. Our Superior General was with us. He gave us a very insightful paper yesterday at the very starting. Brother James TK, the Assistant General responsible for GSJP, who was intensely with us. Brother Irudayam, who nurtured this possibility and gave a very insightful critique of the world today at the beginning of this conference. The provincial superiors, all of them from India and also from elsewhere, who were present and who are present still with us. The other leaders of our congregational leaders, thank you. Thanks to each of you. I see Brother Jimmy there, provincial of East African provinces, joining us. All of you who have been part of this process, thank you. Thank you very much. Tomorrow, the meeting would be, we will start at this very same time at 2 p.m. And this is meant for the general team will join us, the provincials of the 10 provinces in Asia, and perhaps others would join us along with their council, the provincial leadership team. We will have the GSJP commissions joining us, and the Assistant General have invited some of the senior brothers to deliberate on what is our way forward in the coming years as we deliberate on, as we think about the post-pandemic world. So once again, thanks to each of you. I want to thank very specially Simon Raj, who was managing our technical aspects, the sisters and the MSI team who helped us make this experience a very good experience of fraternal sharing. And each of you, I'm not able to, if I am leaving out names who have made this possible, this conference possible, excuse me for it. But I hope that these 2 days is only the beginning of a new brotherhood, a new congregation, a new possibility, a new entity in mission that Montfort would like us to see ourselves as. So thank you very much. And we hopefully will have more of these experiences that the virtual world has made it possible. So thank you very much.